Have you ever noticed we don't hear a lot about Jesus' earthly father, Joseph? You get it early in the Gospels when Jesus' birth and so on. And there's one occasion in Luke's Gospel in chapter 2 where we see where Jesus is 12 years old and both parents are mentioned. But after that, never hear of Joseph again. Now, most scholars presume it means that Joseph probably died at a relatively young age. And so we don't hear from him. Now, when a husband dies in the ancient world, there's no widow's pension, there's no welfare. So the responsibility to take care of the widow fell to the family, in particular the oldest son. And that, in this case, is Jesus. So what we've got here in this scene is Jesus actually literally hanging on the cross, going through the most agonizing, unspeakable agony. And here he is taking on the sins of the world. And there's Mary, his mother, looking on. And what is she going through? She might even be taken back to, remember where we were way early in the gospel, the wedding at Cana when they ran out of drinks for the party, and Mary comes to Jesus, can you do something? And he says, now is not my time. What was he talking about? Now Mary knows. This is the time he was talking about, where he's not just going to provide drinks for the save the embarrassment for the party, which he did, but something far greater. He's going to provide even for Mary's very soul. This is kind of a transition point for Mary from Mary as Jesus' mother to Mary, the disciple of Jesus. Now, here we have Jesus, we might say the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's bearing the sins of the world. He's being tortured. He's going through the most agonizing time, and we can't even begin to picture what it's like to be taking on the eternal wrath of God. If ever there was a time, it'd be fair enough to be thinking about yourself. This would be it. And yet, this is the moment where Jesus, going through this very thing on the cross, is concerned with compassion for his own mother, that she would be taken care of when Jesus dies. And that's what that was all about that we just read, where Jesus says that the disciple whom Jesus loved, we know by the end of the gospel he's talking about John. Right? And this is the moment where he says to John, this is your mother, and to Mary, this is your son. What's he doing? He's handing over the responsibility of care that fell upon him as the oldest son. He would have been probably the main provider of the family after the death of Joseph and so on. And now he's handing that over to John to take care of. So, you children listening to me, you want to know what honour your mother and father is? It's all, if you really want to know what it is, take a look at what Jesus is doing here, right here. In this time where, if ever there was a time when he would be right to be concerned about himself and concerned about his own situation, he's wanting to honour his mother right to the last. So here we've got Jesus on the cross. We can't even imagine what it would be like for Mary as a parent to watch the child whom she bore, raised, and is now a man, and there he is going through this torture. I know if I asked any of the parents here, which would you prefer, if you had to actually go through a horrible torture yourself or watch your own child go through, most of the parents would say, no, I'd rather go through it myself. What must it have been like for Mary to watch all this unfold before her eyes, nothing she can do. And there he is in total humiliation. Remember, he's naked on the cross. He's bleeding. He's gasping for air, and she's watching. What must it have been like for her as a parent? Well, there's another parent we don't think about, and I don't mean Joseph. What must it have been like for God the Father to look upon his Son going through this for the sins of the world? And we know that God doesn't have passions like a human, like go up and down and out of control. But don't think that God doesn't have feelings because he's God. He has greater feelings, more pure, perfect, greater grief at wrong than we do. What grief must God the Father have gone through, knowing that this had to happen? Well, we're not told exactly what grief the Father went through. All we're told in this gospel was that God the Father so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. Now, if it's the custom for the widow to be cared for by a family, and that's what Jesus is doing here, in hand, his responsibility, so he wants to make sure she's taken care of. But if Jesus is the oldest son, why does he give this responsibility to John? Wouldn't it be more natural to go to the next oldest son? That would be the normal thing. Family, right? Family. That was the custom in the ancient world. That was the responsibility. Now, we could speculate and say, well, hang on a minute. For starters, the other brothers were not believers at this point, remember? So maybe that tie of believing community is closer even than biological ties sometimes. Maybe that's the reason. And the brothers are not there anyway. They're living in Capernaum. This is in Jerusalem, and they're not there. So he couldn't have handed over to any brothers. Maybe that's a reason. We can only speculate about that. But I want to put it to you that there's another possibility. Just something we'll just explore a little. We won't be too dogmatic about it. We're going to examine it. I'll leave it to you to examine and think about. There were a lot of people at the cross when Jesus was dying. The Romans tried to make a spectacle of it, and then people would be there to see. But the Gospels mention 4 women at the cross. And it would seem that they are referring to the same 4 women as they give the account of the same event, because it's as though they are the 4 prominent people that are involved as a believing community. For instance, we see Mary Magdalene mentioned by all the Gospels as being there. But here in John, we're told Mary Magdalene was there. How did we know who she was? All of a sudden she just pops up at this point in chapter 19 of John's Gospel, as though you, the reader, you and me, the reader, are supposed to know who she is. Is it because she was a prominent member of the believing community at that point, so everybody knows who Mary Magdalene is? We don't know. What's the reason? We're not told. But Mary is there. And so John mentions these same 4 women. Maybe John's assuming you've already read the other Gospels and know who Mary Magdalene is, but these 4 women are mentioned. Let's look at that carefully in John chapter 19, verse 25. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother, Mary, his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So you've got 3 Marys and Jesus' mother's sister, who's not named by John. Now, if the other Gospels are referring to these same 4 women, I'm suggesting is most likely, then we can figure out from Mark's Gospel that what Mary's sister's name is, if it's the same person. Look at Mark chapter 15, verse 40. Some women were watching from a distance, so same scene. Among them were Mary Magdalene, and she's there again, Mary, the mother of James the younger and Joseph, and Salome. So Mark doesn't mention Mary, Jesus' mother, but she mentions the other 3. And Salome, if she's one of those same 4, that means Mary's mother's sister her name is Salome. Okay? Matthew also highlights, again, 3 of those 4 women not mentioning Jesus' mother Mary, as John does. But he mentions Mary's sister Salome as the mother of Zebedee's sons. Read it with me in Matthew 27, verse 55. Many women were there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, who's also referred to as the other Mary, or as John calls her, the wife of Clopas. She's also the mother of Zebedee's sons. She's not also, that's Salome, Mary's sister. Don't worry if you don't get any of this. You're going to have to look it back on YouTube, but take careful notes here right now, okay? Just bear with me. It's going to be worth it, all right? Hang in there. So we've got these 4 women. Jesus' mother Mary, her sister Salome, who's also the mother of Zebedee's sons. Read it again in John 19, verse 25. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother, Jesus' mother, his mother's sister, Salome, mother of Zebedee's sons, Mary, wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So that's pretty clear. That's mud. John never mentions his own name in the gospel. We figure out who he is, that he's this disciple whom Jesus loved, because it's sort of revealed at the end of the gospel, okay? But he doesn't mention himself by name in the whole gospel. Maybe humility, maybe, doesn't want to put himself forward or whatever, don't know, but he doesn't mention his name. In fact, he's the only one of the gospel writers that never mentions his brother's name. All of the others mention James, his brother, but John never mentions his brother by name. So with the family there. And interestingly here, he doesn't mention Salome by name. He just says it's Mary's sister who is there at the cross, who we're told is also mother of Zebedee's sons. But hang on a minute. Who are Zebedee's sons? James and John. So the reason John's not mentioning Salome by name is it's because it's his mum, and he doesn't mention his own name, his brother's name, or his mother's name. Now we asked, why did Jesus choose John to take his mother in when the culture, the responsibility is for the family to take care of it? Well, if you've been able to follow all of what we've just been saying here, there's a good reason why Jesus picks John to be the one to take care of his mother. It's because John, the guy who wrote this gospel, the guy who was a disciple of Jesus, the guy who would find himself on a prison island like Alcatraz, the island of Patmos, for the faith in his old age. John, the apostle, was Jesus' cousin. And that's why Jesus picks out John to be the one, because he was family. John was family, and so it was a natural thing to ask John to be the one to take his mother in and care for her. So there they are, the women at the cross. Let's read it again to get it clear. Verse 25. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, that's John's mother, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. John highlights these faithful women. John's there, of course, at the cross when Jesus is talking to him, but where are all the other disciples? It's just these 4 women of the faith who have been there. And one of the things that John does in this gospel is he highlights and compares the faith of the women compared to the men. The doubters, the fleers. Where are all the apostles? They fled, except for John. And it's the women that are the faithful ones. They don't know anymore. They don't understand what's going on here, that Jesus is going to rise from the dead and so on. They're just faithful there with him to the end. We've seen it through this gospel, way back in chapter 4 with the Samaritan woman, where this woman shows her faith. The disciples, what are they doing? What's he doing talking to a woman? And a Samaritan at that. Whereas this woman becomes this great woman of faith who actually is a catalyst for all the men of her hometown to become Christians. And on through we saw in chapter 12 where Mary takes that expensive perfume and uses it all just out of faith to anoint Jesus. And what are the blokes doing? What are you wasting all that money? Faithfulness. And here we are at the cross. It's the women who are there at the end, right to the end. And it's the blokes who have already fled and gone. They were the last there at the cross, and they were the first there at the tomb. Just a thought, but have you ever looked around churches and noticed in a lot of churches there's more women than men in them? Thankfully we've got a different mix here. I think you blokes are just the chosen few or something. But have you ever noticed that? Just speculating here, I wonder if there'll end up more women in heaven than there will be men. Just a thought. If that's the case, it'd certainly make this idea that the church is down on women or whatever pretty silly, isn't it? But nevertheless, that's just a thought. You can mull over that one. Here we are with these faithful women standing by the cross. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is actually close enough to the cross that she can hear him speak. So she's not, there's other times where there are people standing at a distance and stuff, but at this moment, she can actually hear him say to her, here is your son. And to John, here is your mother. And so for her to be watching on, it's quite extraordinary as you try and think of her watching on, being faithful to the end, and yet at the very same time, what have we got? We said a contrast between women and men before. What are these blokes doing? They were the soldiers. They're gambling for his last item of clothing below him. They're not even thinking about the fact that right above them, they're not even looking up. They're turning the face away from him so they can cast their lots for who's going to get this. Right above them is a man who's nailed to a cross. And you kind of think to yourself, here's how depraved is humanity. How evil that someone could actually do that. And, we can think of all the different ways that we hear of terror and crimes of violence and rape and abuse and all kinds of horrible things. And you just go, wow, how depraved is humanity? How evil. Well, it actually goes deeper than that. How depraved are you if you can look at the cross, a real historical event, Jesus, the Christ, actually going through that agony for the sins of the world. How depraved if you can turn your face away from him and go on in sin as though, well, it's not that bad, we all sin. How depraved is the human heart. Peter says he took our sins in his body. See, there's one greater depravity than the physical acts and the horrible, evil things that people do, such as these soldiers in this story, people who commit violence and horrible things, and that's to behold the Son of God and say you even believe in that torture and that agony and that gasping for air and taking on the very eternal wrath of God, the equivalent of eternal hell, and just walk away from that, turn your face away from that and say, I'm not that bad. And say, I just need this little extra sin here. It won't matter. Just hang on that cross a bit longer. It's all right. How depraved. How depraved. We weren't physically there at the cross, but in a sense we can still tell whether you're one of the soldiers or whether you're one of the faithful women. And it all comes down to your attitude to sin. Now, notice I didn't say whether you sin or not. You will sin every day for the rest of your life. Your thoughts at least, if not words and deeds. But the thing that separates that which is no faith at all to that which is faithful and has real faith in Jesus is your attitude to sin. Not whether you sin or not, but what is your attitude when you do sin? What do you do then? Do you go, oh, well, look, so I sinned again, that's all right, Jesus died on the cross for my sins. And what's your attitude? Or do you rush to confession and seek that forgiveness? It's attitude. And you can think about it now in your life. Is there any part of your life where your attitude is such that there's a practice or a relationship or some kind of worldly pleasure or where you put your time or your money that you would be happy for Jesus just to hang up on that cross a bit longer because I just got to have this. I'm not worried too much about it. I'm turning my face away from you. What's your attitude towards the things that God say nailed Jesus to the cross? Sin. How are you speaking, even to those you love, care about? Maybe a spouse or a parent or a child or work mates or friends, or attitude. How's your secret life going? What goes on inside here? What's your attitude towards that which nailed Jesus to the cross? Are you hiding your face from him as though you could hide? But are you hiding your face from him? Or when you sin, do you go to him to confess? You know, we think we know how bad sin is, but let me tell you what God thinks of sin. Take a look at the cross. That's God's own Son there. That's God going through that grief of seeing his own Son. Why? Because that's how bad God sees sin. That's what it cost. There was no other way to take it away. You know, we need to grapple with that. Oh, right, yeah, got a good attitude to sin. I'll start trying to be a good person. No. An attitude that there's nothing I can do. Only to the cross I cling. There's no amount of good stuff I can get going until I finally get right with God. Nothing. The cross says there was nothing you could do. God had to do it. But he has done it. What's your attitude to that? He has done it. He's taken away your sin. What's your attitude? Faith. We'll say, wow, he did that for me. So when I sin, I'm going to rush to him. I'm going to flee in advance from things I know that are wrong. I'm going to be running. I'm not going to turn my face away from him. I'm going to turn my face away from sin and run to him. The Apostle Paul says the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. It's foolishness to those soldiers, that's for sure. But you know, all of the religions of the world and all the non-religious people, they all join together and say, sin, not that bad. That's this stuff about a cross. I'll try and be a good person. I'll be a religious person. Or I won't be religious, but I'll be a good person. They collectively say to God, you're wrong. You're over the top with this whole thing. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. But if you're a believer, your attitude is, I was so far gone. God had to do it. God had to do it. You know what the meaning of life is? It's the glory of God who would give up his own Son for us, and for you to come to know that. To know that. How great this God is. How does he display this glory? At the cross, we've got the whole of history hurtling towards a day of judgment, where God will deal with everything down to the smallest detail. And you and I were headed there too. And we were just going to get what's fair. We were just going to get all according to the things we've done, thought, said, judged. Nobody able to complain about that. Fairness, justice, isn't that what we want? No, we don't want that. Because that's what this world is headed for, justice. We were destined. That's all hell is. It's just justice. Justice forever. And you want to know what the meaning of life is? Is to come to know the glory of God, that he stepped in advance. You know what the cross is? The cross is the day of judgment. Come in advance. For you, if you will have faith in him, if your attitude to sin will change from being, it's not that bad, to look what I've done to Jesus on the cross. I don't want to walk in that anymore. Oh, but you will. You'll fall. You'll fail again and again. But what's your attitude when you do? Because if your attitude is one of faith, you will rush back to that cross and find forgiveness and cleansing, and know that that cross was for you. It was for you. If you've believed in the cross, it'll change everything. It'll change everything in your attitude, the way you live. But let me close on one other thing it'll change. It'll change in your attitude towards people around you who don't know this. You will be so fired up if you really believe in that cross, that is the day of judgment come in advance for us if we will take hold of it by faith. And you're going to want to tell others. You're going to want to invite them here or to other events or hand them a tract or whatever it is. But your attitude will change if you've really believed in the glory of God, which is the cross of Christ.